So joining you, we'll have, as we said, in remote, Pedro Ramos from Promptly, and also Nawal Roy from Holmusk. We will see them just here in the screen next few seconds. And in the meantime, who will be here joining you physically?
Yes.
In one hand, Guillem Masferrer from Asabys Partners. Buen día, Guillem. Muy buenos días. And we will also have here Dr. Pablo Villoslada del Hospital del Mar y Universitat Pompeu Fabra. Muy buenos días.
Pablo. Oops.
Okay. Well,
so
we will see the. You can see just right there now.
Welcome,
and
Nawal.
We'll see it here in the screen. So, okay.
Welcome,
so
Pedro. Can you speak and see if it works?
Hi.
Great. Nawal?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, it's Nawal here. Can you hear me?
Great. So we have a representation of entrepreneurs, scientists, neurologists, so and also investors. So I think we have a good cross-section of representative of people that are vested in and needed to succeed at scale and to achieve what we set out to achieve here, which is essentially achieving the biggest possible impact, in neurolongevity, to extend neurolongevity and to improve mental well-being. I know you've been introduced, but very, very briefly, if you can just tell us what is it that motivates you to be in this mission to achieve neurolongevity and mental well-being. What is your interest in the space?
Myself, I'm very convinced that now we are entering an area, a time in which we can improve diseases of the brain, and with that improve people's quality of life, knowledge, technology, even some level of theory, and then moving the health system and the medical device, pharma system all together. Not easy at all, but I think that we are going to see impressive changes in the next decade.
Great. What is your...
Yeah, well, myself. Hello?
As you fix that...
I can speak up. Well, yeah, myself, I mean, as Marco was introducing me, I'm an investor, so the perspective that I take in taking a look at this is obviously for us, we invest in health innovation at Asabys Partners. We're a venture capital firm based in Barcelona. And obviously for us, since we try to invest in those relevant and met needs in which... Thank you. Hello? Yeah. In those relevant and met needs that you can solve through technology, we take a look at those problems that we expect to be real blue oceans, in which you can create new solutions for patients that are suffering by the use of technology in a society that is obviously aging. We want to match, I like this lifespan versus health span topic that you have been discussing during these 2 days. And for us, it's a great opportunity to find new solutions to make patients feel better. And for us, it's exciting, and we are striving to find the best products and the best technologies to do that.
Great. Pedro, can you...
Well, yeah, do you hear me well?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here, and just in one line or 1 minute, just to also praise TechTour for amazing work that you have been doing in the past years, or at least the last 5 years that I know you. It's really true what you show in the slides. I think you are probably the most interesting ecosystem builder, merging companies and investors, of course, in Europe. So, well, keep going, and maybe the reason why we I'm Pedro. I'm the CEO of Promptly Health. We are a health analytics company, and one of the areas that we focus is precisely on neuro and mental health, and I guess also one of the reasons that makes us do that was alluded by by the two colleagues that spoke before me is the unmet needs. I think that this area is an area that doesn't have the same type of attention that we see by everyone, I would say. So I found it curious that you had TechTour missions, and as you probably know, there's a cancer mission now that is on Horizon, big European Commission important program, and I guess we don't for cardio or for oncology, we don't have for neuro and mental health the same focus, the same capabilities in place. So I think if more and more companies that are doing good work and investors and healthcare providers come together to solve these unmet needs, I think we will probably have the same impact that we hope to have in the other major clinical areas.
Nawal, what is your connection
yes.
to the mission?
Yes, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm afraid I'm not there in person, but for the benefit of the audience, I'm Nawal Roy, founder and CEO of Holmusk. Holmusk is the largest real-world data company focused on mental health and also on the neurodegenerative diseases. My commitment to the mission is the way I look at it. I have been building this company for the last 10 years, and now we are the largest data company in this space. In healthcare, it is the final frontier. It is one of the most complex problems to solve that has not been solved yet. And as we are entering into new domain, and I'm finding that not only the comorbidity factor on the current standalone basis, but the complexity of our understanding of our mind and brain has not been done at any level of real scientific rigor and in detail. And it's inter-exchanged with everything that we do on a regular basis, both from metabolic risk perspective, but for everything that is emerging at a very, very fast pace. So my interest is partly from multiple unsolved problems as of now, and many more unsolved problems and emerging problems that is coming on the way.
Thank you, Nawal. Maybe just to tag on to this and turning to you, Pablo. You are a neurologist, right? So you have deep expertise from a scientific standpoint and also clinical standpoint. This notion that the brain and the mind, we don't understand it as well. It's mischaracterized, oftentimes misunderstood. Do you agree with that? Where are we on this journey of deciphering, if you will, not only the brain and the mind, but also the pathologies and the conditions? Because unless and until we have, a good, let's say, definition of where we are, how far away are we from understanding, and of course data is part of it. But yeah, we would be interested in your thoughts as to where we are on the journey.
Okay, I will make an example. You remember 90s, they finished the Human Genome Project, and they identified 20,000 genes, which is, more or less a little bit more than a fly and less than some plants. And they call everything else junk DNA, based on ignorance. Okay, same thing happened with the brain. They call, you only use 10% of the brain. This is a nonsense. Okay, since these times in which was plenty of unknowns, I think that we are moving to a time in which we start to understand many things. Technology is at the basis, at the root of that. I was amazed 3 or 4 years ago attending the Society for Neuroscience, biggest meeting, 30,000 or 40,000 scientists worldwide. And, at this time, the level of resolution, in the past, my colleagues used to study neurons. Okay, now, one single neuron, or maybe a couple of them. Now they are studying all the neurons at the same time in different situations. Okay, we are increasing the level of resolution. This is very important to the brain. We need to work at the levels of micrometers and milliseconds in the whole brain, all at a whole. Now the problem is that this technology is producing so much data that, one single experiment requires tens of people, decades to analyze until AI came out in our rescue. Okay, I will say that right now we start to understand truly better the brain, far from being completely understood, of course, but, we have better knowledge. For example, in neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer, Parkinson, and all of these, okay, still many unknowns, but we have some very good clues that are driving to diagnosis. Okay, breakthrough. We have a blood test to diagnose Alzheimer. I would say that it's close to be a miracle because, you know, we don't have the same for the others. And based on that, not only the test, but discovering which proteins are important, we have now treatments which are far from perfect, but it's a new step. In epilepsy, for example, we have many treatments, or in stroke, or in MS. Okay, in neurology, we have many. Psychiatry and mental health is the next frontier because the level of resolution. In neurology, we work with big areas of damage or big problems. In psychiatry, most likely, is at the level of synapses. And, you know, we need to have a high resolution in order to understand the biological aspects of these problems. Of course, mental health is more than the biology, and the functioning of the brain is how our mind is being developed. But at least, if we have this knowledge, understanding, and tools to intervene in our brain, of course, this is going to translate to benefits for patients with mental health problems.
So neurodegeneration is more advanced. It's more, also pharmaceutical companies are investing a lot more, or have been investing a lot more over the last 20 years, and because it's easier, you say, to understand, because mental health, there has been a little bit of retraction of investment, because we don't see so much investment in the mental health space. It's coming back. I must say it's good to see some changes, some recent investment by big companies in the space, but it's not. Is the level of complexity different, therefore, in mental and health and versus neurology in general?
That's correct. I used to work in Genentech Roche. I had a very successful time because we launched 2 drugs. One of them became a blockbuster in 9 months, which is, okay, it was for multiple sclerosis, meaning it's more immunology than neuroscience. But Roche was investing in neuroscience for long. Other companies, it was some ups and downs, meaning neuroscience was popular in the 90s, decreased in the 2000s. Now it's coming back. It's coming back in neurodegenerative diseases for sure, pain and headaches. These are very strong topics. Psychiatry and mental health maybe not as used to be. I'm sure that, okay, I think that we are at the edge in which we are going to start to make good understanding of psychosis, schizophrenia, eating disorders. You know, in a previous panel, we were discussing about neuromodulation. Mm-hmm. And the concept is, okay, we have technology, but what's happening is that we have these entities, depression or anxiety or eating disorders. But this is, you know, is highly heterogeneous. And we need to go to each of these conditions and select a great group of patients that share some commonalities. In the case of neuromodulation, we need to identify patients with the same circuits involved in some symptoms. We are going to treat symptoms, for example, we are discussing aggressivity in autism, or maybe in psychosis. Doesn't matter the disease itself, it's the symptom and the brain circuit. In this case, with neuromodulation, that requires this kind of neuroanatomy details. In the case of pharma, yes, some biological processes that are shared or are relevant for brain diseases. Another breakthrough, rare diseases, genetic diseases used to be the orphan, okay, they are the orphan, and neglected diseases. Okay, 20 or 30 years after the Human Genome Project, this technology now is paying results, and now we have gene therapies and RNA therapies, and half of them are for neurological diseases. For example, we are taking care of patients with ALS, with genetic ALS. For example, now we have a strong collaboration with Columbia University, and we have agreement, and they send us the antisense oligonucleotides, a kind of modified RNAs, in order to treat patients with a specific mutation, FAS, gene FAS, okay? These patients with ALS that used to die in 3 years or 4 years, now they are stable. Yeah. Meaning ALS, for the first time, only the genetic cases. I'm saying that, and I can say the same thing for spinal muscular atrophy, to some extent to Duchenne. Okay, rare diseases, genetic diseases, because we know the genetics, the biology very well now. Advanced therapies are like engineering. We see the bioinformaticians sit in front of the computer, they design even at a personalized level.
Yeah.
And then we have treatment that works in these genetic cases. And we learn a lot about the biology with the hope that this can be translated to the sporadic cases, which is the front line. Okay, this is mainly, let's say, neurology. In psychiatry, there are not so many genetic bases, genetic cases themselves, but these progresses that we have both in neuromodulation and pharmacology and gene therapies, I think is going to benefit all of us.
That's fascinating because indeed, if you have like a genetic underpinning and you understand the underlying pathophysiology and link it to biology, then it's easier to, let's say, identify potential targets and intervene. But in the absence of that, in mental health, particularly in neuropsychiatry, what do? We have other data sources, right? And maybe turning to you, Nawal, because you have been looking at collecting and aggregating, integrating different data sources. What other data, short of, let's say, the biological data, can we and should we collect, and in what way should we integrate them to make sense, right? And to inform diagnosis and inform treatment?
Yeah, I think before we go there, I would love to sort of share two observations. And I'm not trained as a scientist, so my statements are not going to be very scientific figure from that perspective. But if there is one thing that I've learned in this space, say compared to say oncology guys, the breast cancer guys don't fight with the lung cancer guys, and all of them fall under the same umbrella of oncology. Somewhere in neurology and neuropsychiatry, they need to figure out what is the single umbrella that they can be part of. Otherwise, this silo approach impacts huge amount of infighting within the neuropsychiatrists and neurology, as well as if the fight becomes, or when it comes to capital allocation at a macro scale, it becomes much more rigorous, when the oncology or the cardiology fight. On the second side is, if you look at the number of drugs that is coming in the pipeline for neurodegenerative, let's assume dementia and Alzheimer's, there are approximately around 180 different new drugs coming into the pipeline, in which 120 of them is all focused on neuropsychiatric modulation for neurodegenerative diseases. So there is an extremely high degree of synergy between the two fields, but the scientific community still treats them separately and still talks about mind and brain, whereas there has to be a deeper umbrella, whatever the word is, whether the word is neuroscience or CNS, whatever it is, but needs to figure out a single wording under which the both can work together. That's number one. Number two, what I have learned in terms of the last 10 years and collecting the huge amount of data, my premise is that real world data coming from the clinical world, where you are capturing the patient data, that is the holy grail of the starting point. And organizing them and structuring them, there is a huge degree of learning from each patient to make the next patient better. And whether that is done at a cohort level or whether that is done at a individual patient level, both of them are very, very important. And building that scientific grade industrial scale database is the very strong starting point on which this journey of really figuring out whether it is drug development or whether it is care delivery or what have you, policy guidelines on the basis of that. Once you take that and then once you have the foundation of the clinical data, then you can certainly add all kind of omics data that you want to have, whether it is genetics data, whether it is proteomics data, or any other layer of data that you want to sub-collect for understanding biomarker or understanding biology, that can be done. If you go from the payment point of view, then understanding and attaching claims data, tokenized way of understanding all of that, and adding to the clinical data is going to be another component that will influence the sector. Where if you truly think that where the sector is going, and if you see from the supply point of view, then 3 or 5 years from now, you will see there will be something called a ChatGPT for mental health or ChatGPT for neurology. And for building that, you certainly need extremely large training data set on which all of these domain-specific language model or foundational models can be built. So if I were to sum it up, I would say clinical data is a starting point. Attachment of omics data to genetics data to claims data, all of those is the superstructure of it. And then building truly foundational models, very domain specific. I don't think the science is out there to really build, AGI on this, but certainly building a super solid superstructure of the database is going to be the future in the next 5 years or so.
And it looks like we are just getting started. It's very hard to integrate data sets, right?
Yes.
To find data, to aggregate to data, to polish them, to cleanse it, to make sense of it, right? I mean,
yeah.
Allow me to say, Nawal, we've known each other for many years, and you've raised over 100 million, right? And to build the company that you are building to date, okay? And in one of our conversations, you told me that you need another billion, or at least 500 million, right, to take it to the next milestone, let alone fully, let's say, fully integrated data sets. And you have been only aggregating health economic, clinical records, like health records, mostly in the US and some outside of the US. So it's a lot of money, right, to get to where we need to get to. So I'm turning to you, Guillem, from an investor standpoint, right? You are a venture capital, of course, so you're not a bigger investor, private equity or others. But how do you see this level of investment, right? So it's quite a lot of money to get us to the next level. Where does this money come from?
Well, basically. From us, I would say, as investors, professional investors that kind of get a specific knowledge on a field that you find that it's relevant enough to invest. What I can speak from the experience that we've had at Asabys, we have invested in several companies in the mental health space and also in the neuro space, maybe focusing more on the mental health space, which is the one that I've been most involved in. I can speak of 2 companies, actually, 2 investments that we've made. Actually, from our first fund, there were 2 investments. The first one done in 2019, the second in 2020, 2 Spanish companies. Different propositions, different technologies. The first one, they created virtual reality environment to treat mental health conditions, particularly anxiety and depression related. The idea was for mental health professionals to be able to have a virtual environment to treat patients there, a lot of clinical evidence. Actually, the company already in the market, selling across several European countries. We led the Series A investment in 2019. The company must have raised close to maybe 10, 15 million euros from different investors, European investors mostly. And at some point, with the company already, with all the clinical de-risking made, some willingness from professionals to use technology already implemented in several countries across Europe, as I was saying, with revenues close to 3-4 million revenues, we were unable to find additional capital to fundraise the next stage. At that point, for us, the most evident step was to partner up with another company, in this case, a US company, which was doing using similar approach from a technology perspective, but in another field. It was in physical therapy. And we decided to merge the 2 companies, move the company to the US, and there we have been able to raise capital. It's true that, sometimes it's easy to go and say in the US it's easier to fundraise. I think it's more a global problem, if you will, on whether, and this is something that actually happens in mental in neuro, but also in healthcare in general, or in health tech in general. You need to find the right incentives for stakeholders to get involved. I think when you are able to create or develop a technology that really provides this value, that can really create, you're solving a pain point for professionals, you're making patients feel better, and it's a scalable business model. In principle, you should be in a good position to fundraise, but it's not the case. Yep. So to your question, I don't know exactly. We face this problem every day. It's true that awareness, understanding from professionals, for patients, for healthcare stakeholders, for payers, that these technologies can eventually become the best or potential standard of care or the best way to treat a patient it's the way to go. I guess it's just a matter of time to continue to do this.
Yeah, just on the topic of data, because if it's not only private capital, right? So Pedro, you're building a business, right? That is, you can talk more about what you're doing, but I would say you're building the pipes, right? To connect data, to source data, to integrate data. So you're not really aggregating any one specific data set like Nawal is doing in any particular, let's say, vertical, but you are the plumber, if you allow me to say so, right? You are the plumber offering the tools for data to be extracted out of hospitals or other, let's say, institutions. And so tell us a little bit about what you do, and because you are privately funded as well, and you have had some success, you know, in scaling your business, and you have a very good perspective as to what it takes to connect to different, let's say, institutions and persuade them to open up their pipes so that data can be aggregated and integrated. Tell us a little bit about your experience in doing that.
Yeah, we're compared to what Nawal mentioned before, we are taking, let's say, the opposite approach of aggregating, that is federating. So as you mentioned, we are not actually moving the data from where it currently already is. So we deploy technology that federates the data across different hospitals and countries. We believe that is potentially the only way for actually using data at scale in Europe. Currently, we are in around 400 hospitals and clinics in Europe, in Spain, Portugal, France, the UK, and now starting in the Nordics. We have around 40 million patients in the platform federated. So yeah, it's in our view the way to actually make this work of plumber, as you put it. Just a comment on what was mentioned before that I think is very interesting. So you alluded to the impact that the complexity of mental health has on from an, let's say, investor perspective or an investment perspective, and how that impacted the fact that not sufficient capital has gone into that space, which I agree. I think it also has a very big impact in our field of data. So Nawal alluded to several types of data that are important in this space. I would say that in mental health, even more than in other areas, I think the capability to capture that complexity that you mentioned, that in many ways only manifests outside the hospital. It manifests with certain triggers. You need to capture not only like was mentioned, the biology data, the clinical EMR data, like biomarkers, lab data, but you really need to find good ways to capture more social behavioral data that, again, only in many cases manifests outside of the hospital. So that kind of like patient-generated data is quite important in this space compared to others. And yeah, like again, in the network that we have specific hospitals that are actually capturing some of that data at scale. I certainly see that as a very valuable data point for especially in this space. We have some of our like we have a specific country even that we collaborate that is in the UK that has almost 200,000 patients with longitudinal patient-generated data, which is quite difficult to find, quite unique. More than 3 years of longitudinal data. This is quite difficult and quite unique, quite difficult to find, quite unique. But I think it's the right way to go if we want to really build the data sets that can do what Nawal mentioned before, like really inquiring and like go exploring ChatGPT type of approach. But yeah, like of course developing new therapies. I really believe that the targets will only be in this space of mental health. The targets will only be completely or understood and found if we have more data that comes from patients at home, that comes from patient-generated data, social behavioral data that we can harvest and put into perspective of other types of data.
Yeah, and just to stay with you for a second, Pedro. So you are doing all this work, and for the benefit of whom? How do you actually then monetize it, or who wants to have access to your data, and for what purposes?
Yeah, so our competitors are clinical research organizations, so it's a model that already exists. So there are already life science companies that want to have a way to access data, to develop their studies, to develop their therapies. What we feel, and I felt like I'm a clinician by background, and what I felt when I worked at the hospital, on the hospital side on this space, is that there was a very unbalanced market, I would say, for the hospitals. It was very easy to hand over data to someone in a pen drive, and then the data was gone. Any enrichment that data set had was never reverted back to the hospital. And I think that's what with the federation we are actually changing. That's maybe why it's, I would say, for some people at least surprising that we are able to convince so many hospitals to enter the network. But in the end, I think we're giving the power back to the hospitals. We are putting a lot of the, let's say, the upfront investments on creating those pipes, like you said. But in the end, I think those pipes allow the hospitals to control where the data goes, to control also the enrichment that is done on the data. So in the end, that asset that they have, they're actually able to use it in a better way, and not having new data sets created by clinical research organizations every time that there's a pharma company that wants to launch a project. And I think that's fundamentally different, and I think very aligned with also how Europe is thinking on secondary use of data and on reuse of data. So yeah, that's how we also fund the company.
And just the last question on this topic, you are doing it bottom up, hospital by hospital. You're privately funded by venture capital, actually, and you have been growing very fast. There is this European Health Data Initiative, and so the question is more, what is the role of government, if any, in helping you or creating the frameworks? So how is government helping or not? In your business?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good and fair question. Like, by principle, I think the best way that the government can help is not stand in the way. But I think that in this particular case, the regulation goes in the direction of actually unlocking more the data that we have here in Europe. So I think it's signaling, it's sending a very good signal to the market that according to our European values, of course, data should be used, and we agree with the governance principles that are, let's say, included in the law in that new legislation, and I would say that we were even including those governance principles in our network before the legislation came into force. So we didn't write the law, but if we wrote or advised the law, we would have advised it in I would say similar directions. So the way we see this is that there will be public networks of data in Europe, certainly, but there will be also private networks of data, and I think the governance principle will be the same on federation of data, secure access, auditability on who had access and for what. I think all of that is what we are building with these hospitals that we have in the network, and of course also a viable business model on the use of the data. This is a very mature business already in the US. I think we have very interesting. The person last month that told me that in the US they have corrupt data. What's a very strong sentence. Certainly in Europe we don't have corrupt data. We haven't. We need to do a lot of work in improving it, but it's not corrupted by fee for service or by the financing mechanism and by specific specific health system characteristics that the US has. So clearly, we have a very good edge on this space if we can use it, and we can get companies to scale at the point that you mentioned. That is really going to full European. I think full European should be the goal for companies like ours, and certainly it's our goal to get full European. We are on the road. I think we have good track of and already a good milestone of where we'll get to be full European. But I think this area needs a full European company on access to data.
So the reason why I'm so focused on data, because and the topic of the session is really, you can't improve what you don't measure, right? Or not able to measure accurately. And so I've heard the topic. So Nawal goes very vertical on mental health, and he is unique in that sense. But of course, we know that there are other determinants of mental health, and that is captured in different data sets. So from your standpoint, Pablo, what would be the ideal scenario that everybody just works together, and they all integrate and share their data, so that then everybody can really start leveraging and improving, clinical outcomes. So how do you see it from the clinician standpoint, or even just even you, Guillem, from an investor standpoint? What is the desired outcome here? Because we're all tackling problems from different angles, but we need to have a common data set that we somehow, or at least ideally, we would want to have a common data set that everybody can work with, right? Mm-hmm. So what is your view as to where this should go, from a clinical standpoint?
Okay, I said before, mental health is a special situation in which all the social factors have a very strong component, meaning this is easier to measure, meaning social science can collect more data compared to the data we collect for the human body or for the brain. Even with that, we collect a lot of data, but data most of the time is redundant, is noisy, and is not very accurate, meaning we measure again the same things with omics or with imaging, and maybe we are not measuring the right things in order to understand, meaning this is a challenge. But saying that, the efforts done in the last year, for example, in genetics or in proteomics for biomarker discoveries, has paid the benefit when they move to thousands, hundreds of thousands samples, for example, of individuals being tested with long longitudinal studies. For example, one example I like to put here is in Alzheimer. The NIH put years ago more than 150, 200 million in a project called ATHNI, Alzheimer's Disease Imaging Initiative. And they generate a huge data set, 3 data sets with all the neuropsychological testing, all the genetics, all the MRIs, quantify MRI, which is a lot of work, all the PET imaging, quantify PET imaging, and they published 3,000 papers from that. Okay, this has generated a huge knowledge about the disease, plus other initiatives, for example, in biomarker proteomics that end up in some advancements, not truly solved. The question is always that we are fragmented. Europe, this is the problem with Europe compared with the US. In the US, you start in San Francisco, and once you have a project, you move to the rest of the country, which is the whole US, which is as big as Europe. One single law, one single language, meaning it's natural. Here, we are 27, and even in Spain, we have even communities and many barriers. At the end, what is important to have the incentives to share data or to aggregate data. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And on top of that, we have regulations. Always make fun. I was working in San Francisco. People said in Silicon Valley, we invent things. In China, we fabricate them. And in Europe, you regulate. Okay, of course, we need to regulate technology. It's not the Wild West, but we need to facilitate the way to create these big data repositories, and then most likely with public investment, just pay attention. Texas has decided to put $8 billion in Alzheimer's disease. just taking a small percentage from the taxes. I remember in California they did 15 years ago for stem cells, and you know it was a push, a big push for. Here in Europe we have the flagships program, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's the same situation. Okay, I think that it's important. We need at the government level we put the resources, and then we allow the different players, academic, hospital, companies, you know, to interact one to the others. Everybody with their own incentive, they do whatever they know to do, and they will pay benefits on that. Yeah. And of course, the society. I think it's very important the patient implication. In general, in Europe, patients are very passive, very reactive, and they expect the governments or the politicians to solve everything, which is completely the opposite of what's happening in the US. Okay, I see some little changes, and time by time there are more patients and foundation proactive and adopting such a role. For example, always in my field of neurology, okay, the National MS Society in the US, okay, always a sample from the US, sorry, but the Michael J. Fox Foundation have created impressive data sets, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation with the ATHNI or some others. Okay, there have been initiatives coming from, a joint between industry, governments, and patients associations that have created these conditions of having access to meaningful data that has been mined and sometimes deliver results in terms of diagnostic of therapies.
Yeah. No, I'll come to you in a second, Guillem. I just wanted to have one follow-up question to you, Nawal, because of course we have Pedro as a European champion, if you will, you know, focusing very much on Europe. Well done. I'm a big believer. But Nawal, you come from Singapore, you moved to the UK, then you tried in Europe, and then you ended up doing a lot of your business in the US. It's not that you forget about Europe, you know, very keen on expanding in Europe, but tell us a little bit about, you know, just to pick up on what you said, Pablo, is it really that more fragmented, more difficult to do business here than it is in the US? Or is the return on investment, let's say, proposition different?
The simple answer is yes. It is much harder, you know, because we essentially have to work market by market. But I have come to the conclusion that there are two things. Number one, I don't want to fight the market all the time, because as a small company, it's impossible to fight the market. And hence, I only want to go after and solve the problems that can be solved with the current resources and with the current data and the limitations that which we are operating. I have to learn to accept that. Given that, what can be done at this stage is how do I solve this problem country by country? It means what we have managed to achieve in US, any country that wants to really solve that problem, whether it is Spain, whether it is Portugal, we will be able to do that. And what is that problem that we are trying to solve? The problem that we are trying to solve is curate national level data to influence the question of science, which is evidence problem, the question of drug discovery, as well as the question of how do I make the next patient better, and learning from the patients of that country itself. That curation and that aggregation and then making that data available to the scientific community, both clinical researcher, pharmaceutical researcher, as well as academic scientists, we can do that for any country anywhere in the world. Can I do it for combined Europe? The technical question is yes. The contracting problem is the nightmare. And I will die. Probably it will take 20 years before that contracting happens. And I can't fight those battles. But the battle that I can easily solve is, you know, this can be solved at an individual country level. And, you know, the contracting problem can be solved. And we will be very, very happy to work with any country in the world to solve that problem.
So no, it does answer a question, and it raises more question in my mind. And we'll come back to what it takes to succeed and do the collaborative model that I really believe in. But before we get there, so from an investor standpoint, Guillem, so we've heard, you know, the cycles are very long, okay? To the sales cycles, the procurement cycles for companies investing in healthcare in general, right? So and it's not only the data space, it applies to, broadly speaking, to health technologies, right? So because it's new, because it's emerging, because the clinical adoption is slow, because you need to change clinical pathways, you need to generate the evidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all the good reasons we have heard many times. But from an investor standpoint, does this align with your incentive as a VC? And how does it align or not? And should we not think about alternative funding mechanisms, because you're bound by certain rules and timelines, okay?
So it's a great question, and the answer is it certainly doesn't align with the way that we do business. No, I always have a very fun interactions with my fellow investors from other verticals. No, from people investing in SaaS, for instance, B2B SaaS, these kind of things. They are always surprised that we, as an investor in health tech, we can invest in a company with zero revenue, and we can exit that company, and actually a successful exit eventually. The company still being at $0 in revenue. No? At the end of the day, the value that you are creating by investing in these companies sometimes is beyond the mere financial evolution or financial creation of value. So it does not. Actually, there is currently a discussion, I would say, in the health tech venture capital space or investment space, in whether the current mechanisms or investment vehicles that we have match the companies that we are investing in, because they do not. No? And we see this every day. I mean, as you were saying, there are many things that you need, or many aspects of a company or a solution, if you want to bring it to the market or to patients, that you need to go through, especially when you are investing early stage, that spans beyond the 10-year average period that a venture capital fund has. No? So yeah, it's complex. There are ways in which you can. It's true though that when you are working in a savvy investment ecosystem with other investors that have experience in doing that, there is a pattern recognition way of doing investments that sometimes kind of help you to take the right shortcuts or to put the focus on where the value is, but you're never 100% sure. No? Again, compared to other verticals in which you invest in a company, you move from 1 million revenue to 10 million revenue, you know that you are creating value, then you move it to 100 million in revenue, you might get someone acquiring the company. No? It's not the way it works in healthcare. So short answer, it's no. I think for companies, obviously there might be other alternatives in which, if you are focusing only in the mere financing and getting the funding that you can get, that might be eventually more aligned with the natural evolution of a business. It's true though that sometimes venture capital money, it's not only about the money. At least we want to think that sometimes we can add some value, network, experience in that, and sometimes it's not only the fact that we can write a check and invest money in a company. No? So, but it's a balance, and sometimes it's maybe it matters more where the company is in their cycle when deciding who to go to ask some money for, rather than there is a playbook for getting money if you want to bring your company from point A to point B.
And are there any specific segments or categories, product categories that are more exciting, that align more or less with your economic incentives and timelines within the health tech space?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, and now speaking of Asabys, we invest in health innovation across verticals or across technologies. So we do invest in biopharma, invest in medtech, and invest in software. If you take a look at the companies that we invest in each of these specific sectors, they are completely different. I mean, in the biopharma space, for instance, we invest in companies sometimes spinning off from a research center in which we are, we go to the notary to incorporate the company together with the scientific team. So we do this kind of deals. Usually these companies take many, many years into getting to a potential liquidity event. If you take a look at the software space, for instance, or the medtech, we invest in companies already in the market, no? So with some commercial traction. So it depends. Depends on the value proposition, depends on the technology, depends on the therapeutic area.
Yeah.
So there is not a clear answer to that.
Good. Just jumping back to collaboration, which is a topic that I think is very near and dear, at least to my heart, because I don't think that anyone can do it on their own. I do believe that there is the need to bring together the right stakeholders, facilitate dialogue, facilitate investment, break down the barriers of adoption, building trust, okay, which is at the heart of any business transaction anyway. So how should we do this, right? Or how can we do this better, right? So who are the stakeholders that, for instance, in the case of, you are bringing together Nawal and Pedro, or you would like to ideally bring together to build those relationships and grow your business. Let's say in Catalonia, we have this great community here that is already formed, okay, and people talk to one another. So who are the stakeholders that you ideally want to have access to and have a discussion with that can help you facilitate growth?
I think, can I go?
Yes, please.
I would say the very first problem is really a local hospital system. Okay, a local hospital system with a super innovative sort of leader who is interested to solve a definitive problem. Knowing the scale of the ambition is very important, and what is it he or she is trying to solve. That's number one. Number two is the initial risk capital that is needed, that can be co-shared by every participant. But knowing at the back of it that once the goal is achieved, then what is the commercial value of that? Okay, or can it be, is there a potential of really doing it on a commercial basis? In the initial stage, pro bono risk sharing is very common, but once the target is achieved or the goal is achieved, then the pro bono system doesn't work. So the question comes down to it is, who is funding once we have achieved and proven that the POC works, okay? And that is the simplest way to think about as to, how the collaboration can be incentivized at a very, very local system. It can be at an individual healthcare system level, or it can be at a community level, or it can be at a state level. That is my sort of mechanism that I have seen it working within US, within UK, potentially even in Singapore, certainly when I was used to be in China, then even in China. So that would be my suggestion and my recommendation.
Yeah. How are you doing it, Pedro? So are you going into pilots and pilot after pilot, proof of concepts, or do you have any secret sauce to shortcut that?
No secret sauce, but yeah, I agree with Nawal that this is an area where the majority of the focus now needs to be on, let's say, the supply side. So in the healthcare provider side, I would say that we are doing some of the things that Nawal mentioned on, like, our network, bringing together some of the pioneers in our network in Portugal, with Spain, with the UK, to really make them see the value, the traction, and some of them get out of there saying, how can I also onboard hospitals from around me? From how can I go and be your channel? I think that is when you get to a moment where you are beyond that let's say pilot or initial stages, when you start having local health systems like we have in the UK, where they want to embed in our contracts the possibility of, let's say, bringing new hospitals into the network. I think that is something that then really goes in the direction of creating that critical mass that we need in Europe to make this work. So yeah, a lot of, if you want to create networks for us, I would certainly advise that these will be on the local health systems, hospital play that Nawal mentioned. I totally agree with that.
Okay, let's switch to one of the last topics that I had on mind is, okay, now we have all the data lakes and great data available, communicating, and now we are in the space of clinical adoption and evidence generation, right? So how, and I'm turning to you, Pablo, maybe from a clinician standpoint, to adopt clinically new solutions, right? Or some of your colleagues, how much should we not rethink also the way we collect data, not only collect data, but also process data, use data for the purpose of validating and being sufficiently, let's say, convinced that it doesn't do much harm. I'm talking real-world evidence, of course. I'm talking about observational studies. Sometimes we hold the bar too high, for some of these new technology solutions, digital solutions that were mentioned earlier in a panel before ours. So how can we innovate on that front, and how can we? So what is your view as to what level of rigor and evidence is required before adoption can really be done at scale?
Okay, I would start saying that healthcare is the more conservative and the most regulated sector compared with everything else, I would say. Meaning adopting anything is take a lot of time, there is a lot of resistance, and of course, there is always the first principle, which is don't harm. And this is the basis of the decision from the regulatory agencies. Fortunately, healthcare is based on scientific evidence, what is called evidence-based medicine. And this is great, because otherwise we'll come back to the Middle Age. But this means that you need to create the evidence, and the evidence are based in the gold standard, which is the randomized clinical trial, and then you have all the stages, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. For medical devices, the pilot and the pivotal, but also you have levels of evidence, class 1, 2, and 3, okay? But there is no shortcuts, meaning in US, FDA approved both drugs and medical devices and digital health. Here in Europe, it's not, but maybe the case. Right now, EMA is regulating only drugs, but is moving to also take care of medical devices. Also, you know that EMA is a federated system with the national agencies. And the standards are going to be high because the business model for the pharma is different to the business model for the medical devices and the digital health.
Yes.
And how to do it? Okay, there are no shortcuts. This is the first principle, and this is what I always say to my colleagues working in medtech. In medical devices, you can get a regulatory approval almost without patients, just with first in human, and that's it. And okay, theoretically, you can go to the market, but you are going to kill yourself. You do that because your clients are not the patients, are not. Sometimes the doctor is the prescriber, the client is the payer. The payer is the national health system or the insurance. And in order to get a prescription and get a payment, you need to create the evidence. Meaning you are in the market with regulatory approval, but you don't have the evidence. And of course, clinical trials are expensive. A solution. Okay, this is the diagnosis, now the treatment.
Let's talk about the treatment. Yeah.
Okay, the treatment, I would say this co-developments, collaboration. The academic healthcare sector need to understand the industry, and they need to make money to come back to the investors in order to continue the cycle. And this is our economy, and this is good. Okay, open our doors and collaborate. Compared with the pharmas are so, I used to work in one of them. We were plenty of all the resources. MedTech don't have such level of resources. Could be a co-development in which partners contribute with. This is exactly what I'm doing. I'm working with my former colleagues from San Francisco MedTech companies. They put the technology, I put the clinical trials. I have my own team with clinical coordinators and nurses, project managers, experts on regulatory affairs, and we run the clinical trial at my own risk, with my own resources. They put the technology with the promise that they will develop the CE mark in order to have access or to support me at the time of doing a health technological assessment with one of these quality agencies. In Catalonia we have one, or could be anyone in Europe. And okay, if I have a positive trial, a positive health technological assessment, after that I can ask for reimbursement for the activity I'm doing, but the company can apply for the CE mark, and with this HTA approval, can go to other markets and open one by one. In terms of the benefits, the money flow, of course, the money will start coming from the government and public financing from the health and academic systems to these joint ventures in which the company and the investors take the risk, and they go to the market and they take most of the benefits, and maybe a small percentage of the benefits will come back to these joint ventures.
Okay. No,
This is
I was hoping for
My
something
receipt.
a little bit more innovative, simply because I've been living and breathing regulations and health technology assessments all my life, having worked in pharma and biotech, and applying the same rigor and the same standards to digital health technologies is challenging for the companies, okay, because they don't have the money oftentimes and the time to do these trials. Now, it's not to suggest that we need to, I was just asking, are there innovative ways, okay, of assessing the risks in the real world and so on? I don't know if you have
Is there anything that you have seen in this regard that you can share with us?
I think adaptive trials is always interesting, I mean, they're nodding, both of them. I would say real-world evidence should be more prevalent, okay, for regulatory purposes, certainly for health technology assessments and payers, because there is harmonization and standardization at, let's say, regulatory level, but it's super fragmented when it comes to different reimbursement systems, and that is a killer, right? So anyway, we could do a whole panel on this, but no panel today cannot finish without talking about artificial intelligence, okay? So my last question is really on AI, and how do you see AI helping us with where do you see AI? Let's keep it broad. Like, where do you see AI's biggest benefit, okay, in the healthcare continuum or in the healthcare value chain? So where do you see the use cases that are mostly, let's say, interesting from an investor standpoint, or the ones that you are enabling or want to enable through your organizations, Nawal and Pedro? Maybe we'll start with you, Guillem.
Well, no, it's funny because obviously it's the hottest topic, and it's very rare to see these days one of the 20 to 30 investment opportunities that we receive each week that doesn't have an AI component. Even in the biopharma space, sometimes crazy things, no? You can imagine. For us, at least, the way that we assess it, it's there needs to be a clear applicability of artificial intelligence in the value proposition of the company. So we really need to see the impact that it has. Dealing with data, even foundational models these days, fine. Obviously, there are ways in which you need to work, or that your company needs to build your asset or your technology on. That all of this, let's say, the first layer of artificial intelligence needs to be there. For us, if there is really an applicability in terms of the effectivity of the treatment that you can do, the triage of a particular subset of patients, the cost efficiency that you're going to get from maybe you can run your clinical development in a shorter time, or maybe there is a way in which you can target a digital therapy in a way that can be more synergistic with a pharmacological treatment. This is something that we have in our software portfolio. We invest in digital therapeutic companies. That the fact that you can use AI into tailoring more the technology to a particular subset of patients, those are things that we see the value. No? But we are a bit skeptical and just getting impacted by the use of AI in a company.
The hype. Yeah.
Exactly. You need to go to the detail. No?
Yeah. Nawal or Pedro, or both, actually?
Yeah, I mean, let me jump in. I see it as a mega tailwind in our favor and in the sector's favor. I mean, the traditional partner for a classic health tech company is either a pharma or a payer or a provider, whereas all of a sudden we see tech companies as a major partner in this space, because they are certainly building tools both from curation point of view, but also on the agentic point of view. All kind of tools are really interacting, and they all are looking for high quality data. If you look at any classic AI native company, they are essentially investing most of their resources into three buckets. Bucket number one is compute power, which is everything to do with data centers to what have you, and that goes around 60% of the resources. The second is approximately around 30% of the resources goes into training data set, and approximately around 10% of the resources goes into algorithms. to really have near zero hallucination, in the outcome, whether it is at an individual consumer level or an enterprise solution, training data set is going to be the differentiating mode. And anyone who has truly built scientific grade data sets, that training, can be huge amount of input to all kind of algorithms for foundational base. So we certainly see this as to a unique partner in the tech company who are building those solutions, because we are becoming a feeder to that system. And whether it is an individual health system, or whether it is a large pharma companies, or whether it is a tech company, all of them are really looking for a huge amount of good training data that they can use for AI models.
Thank you.
So we do see it in a very positive way.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just don't want to cut you short. I could go on, but I was given the sign that we are running out of time. Pedro, do you want to have just a quick closing?
Yeah, just a quick
departing thought.
Of course, like private data sets as a mode, I agree. I agree with Nawal. Otherwise, we wouldn't be building the company. Where currently we see that the biggest advantage for us is being able to scale in our traditional roles, data engineering, data analysis, with curated agents that can do the work that we don't need to do with hiring more people. So there's a lot of scalability now in just ingesting more data, processing more data, and creating agents that can do that work, while before you would need to do that with more hands. So there's clearly a scalability mode there. There's the issue now that I think is quite worrisome for European companies, but that will take us another hour. That is the computational power that Nawal mentioned. I think we are also facing that cost-wise and even access-wise problem already, and we see that as a major limitation for European companies moving forward. So certainly something that we in Europe need to
resolve. Yeah. Well, let's invest in data centers, okay? But I think we have run out of time. Pablo, Guillem, Pedro, and Nawal, thank you so much, and I really enjoyed meeting you and having this conversation. Hopefully, more to come. And have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Join me in.
Thank you, everyone.